When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off and said, "Thanks." I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf. It just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn around and see her, and be surprised, and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounds like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out, and it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his f***ing throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed to the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back to sleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received over 40 text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? I was 20, living alone on the ground floor of an apartment building. My living room windows faced the small parking lot for the building, which wasn't gated. I'd stay up, watching TV or playing video games almost every night. It was winter when I first moved in, so I'd have the blinds down at night to help keep the cold air out. Summer came, and there was no AC in the apartment, so I'd open the windows and blinds at night for cool air. One night, I was laying on the couch watching TV when I get that feeling of being watched. I look over at the window, and a man had his hands and face pressed against the screen, merely 3 feet from where I was lying, just watching me. I let out a blood-curdling scream, and he did not even blink. Terrified, I jumped up, I grabbed the phone, and screamed that I was calling the cops. He still just stood there, completely motionless and dead-eyed. At that point, I yelled that I'm getting the neighbor and started walking towards the door, and he finally took off. I locked the window and stayed up all night, completely on edge. My boyfriend at the time came over and stayed for a full week. He made sure to leave the blinds open and sat at the edge of the couch closest to the window to make it known I wasn't alone. The creeper didn't show up again, so eventually I got comfortable, thinking it was an isolated incident of some rando wandering around the parking lot to break into cars. Maybe another 3 weeks after that, I get home late from waiting tables and park in the lot. I get changed, grab a snack, and head to the living room to play games. I start to raise the blinds to open the windows and let in cool air, and the creeper is standing right there, with his face pressed against the screen. He was not standing in the parking lot when I pulled in, as I parked by my window. I can only assume he was waiting around the corner of the building, watching me come home and timing my movements. This time, I grabbed the phone and immediately called the cops. I was shaking, crying, completely hysterical. The creeper takes off. Cops come and say they'll have someone patrol the block when they can, and my boyfriend immediately comes over. He wants to stay with me until I can get out of there, so I start looking at different apartments. Another 3 to 4 weeks or so later, I have an apartment lined up. It's on a higher floor in a doorman building, because at this point, fuck that. My boyfriend had to go out of town for a few days, so I decided to go stay at my friend's place, because I certainly wasn't gonna be there alone. I'm at my friend's place for 2 nights, but wanted to run home and grab a few things I'd forgotten. She goes with me for obvious reasons, and we go in the afternoon, not after dark. We decide to hang out for a bit and play some games together, since it's still daylight and there is activity around the building. No AC, so I hesitantly raise the blinds to get fresh air. I'm terrified opening them, then laugh to myself because I do it, and of course, no one is there. I open the actual window and see 2 large holes cut into the screen, right above the latches you push in to lift it. They were definitely not there 2 days ago. My blood ran entirely cold. The creeper knew my boyfriend was gone. He was watching and saw his car was gone. I left my car there as my friend picked me up, and we always left a light on in the living room to make the creeper think we were awake. So he saw my car, thought I was home, and saw the light on, yet proceeded to cut holes in the screen to break in. I have no idea if he actually gained access, but seeing how bold he was terrified me. How long was he watching me, learning my patterns, and getting gradually more aggressive with every interaction? I still sometimes get a chill when I raise my blinds, and it took a long time getting comfortable living in anything but a high rise. Thanks for the lifelong PTSD, creeper. I live in a small rural community in the eastern US. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department and a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I did not attend because it's just not my thing, plus I have a dog, and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because mostly everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large, white pickup truck drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling, so I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived, and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags. He took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was. Eventually, he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. Shit, he hissed under his breath. What? I asked. It's a body. I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house, along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately, not a clear view of the license plate or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if the coroner has been able to identify the body yet. The police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance, in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get burned in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found. Their loved ones may never have closure.